Okay, so there was a question about what is a trust fall. Everybody know what a trust fall is? I mean, if you remember the good old days of Bible Bag, you'll remember Dale would do trust falls periodically, where he'd put the child up on the stage and then he'd tell them to fall back, and he'd catch him or her. All right, that's trust fall. And I was going to pick a volunteer tonight.
I don't think you get one.
You don't?
Not after a year.
Oh, okay, class is over. Now I want to show you a trust fall, all right?
Okay.
And the question is, well, I'll just show you the trust fall.
You're going to trust that I get you. I'm going to trust that you fall. Laura, you trust me. Okay, let's do this. You ready? Here we go. When I say let's do it. Okay, Laura, let's do it. All right, right there. I got your attention.
So what if a trust fall doesn't go quite like you expect?
Then you fail.
Wow.
Yes, ma'am?
That happened to Wendy 3 times one time.
Did it? She didn't learn after the first one?
She was a child, and we'd gone with a youth group
Yeah.
down the river for a retreat. And the guy, for an example, and he said, fall and I'll catch you. And he did it 3 times and let her fall. And he said, that's where you should be, trusting like a little child.
Well, that explains a lot about Wendy. Okay. So, what about if you know the person that's going to catch you? Surely that'd make a difference, right?
Why can't you do this to Caroline? I've always had something against her.
Okay. Catherine and I are working on a trust exercise, and she's going to fall, and I'm going to catch her. So, step forward just a hair. Put your arms out.
Why can't you do this to Caroline?
Trust me, Catherine. Go ahead and fall. No, you put your leg back. No, put your leg back. Stand up straight. Put your arms out for me. Now, I'm going to catch you. Okay, I promise. Go ahead and fall. Now see, I'm catching you, but you're putting your foot back. Don't put your foot back.
Maybe you're catching
Just a
me.
minute, sweetheart. I'll be right with you, okay? Stay right there. Put your arms out.
Daddy!
Catherine.
Ow! Ow!
You know the person. You ought to be able to trust them, right? Right.
No.
But what if the instructions aren't quite clear enough?
Fall, and it'll be an exercise in building trust between one another. So Harrison, if you don't mind going first, step up here on this chair and close your eyes. All right, and then everybody fill in, and we're going to ask you to fall, and then they will catch you. So you have to trust us. I'm going to count to 3. Just relax and fall. Okay? 1, 2, 3. No, wait,
I've got a chair right here. Who wants to be first? And what if you're trying to learn something new and you're depending on the person to help you do that?
Are you gonna spot me on this backflip, right? Yeah, I got you. Count me down, bro. Here we go. 3, 2, 1.
Rule number 1 in life: don't trust anybody.
Would you do it? No, not anymore. Not anymore. What kind of trust does it take to put yourself in somebody else's hands? And how do you get disappointed in that sometimes? What about maybe you try to trust God to do things? You ought to be able to trust God for anything, right? What makes it so hard sometimes?
His timing is not the same as mine.
Oh, sometimes I don't trust his timing. Or I misinterpret his timing, and that leads to a mistrust. He's not really going to catch me.
Mm-hmm.
What makes trusting God so difficult sometimes?
We get in the way.
We get in the way. What do you mean?
Well, we don't trust completely because we don't trust ourselves completely.
God, I trust you. You do it my way.
Right.
Or God, I trust you, but I'm going to call the shots in this one. Okay? It happens. Go over to Psalm 56. Because I asked this question for you to kind of reflect on during the week. Where is the strength in trusting God? How does that help in those times of fear? And listen to David's words in Psalm 56. It's almost him doing his trust fall with God. And we'll start here in verse 1. Page 538. Be merciful to me, my God, for my enemies are in hot pursuit. All day long they press their attack. My adversaries pursue me all day long. In their pride, many are attacking me. When I am afraid, I put my trust in you. In God, whose word I praise. In God I trust and am not afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? All day long they twist my words. All their schemes are for my ruin. They conspire, they lurk, they watch my steps, hoping to take my life. Because of their wickedness, do not let them escape. In your anger, God, bring the nations down. Record my misery. List my tears on your scroll. Are they not in your record? Then my enemies will turn back when I call for help. By this, I will know that God is for me. And then notice verse 10 and 11. In God, whose word I praise, in the Lord, whose word I praise, in God I trust and am not afraid. What can man do to me? What kind of trust does it take to be able to say that to God? I mean, what is there to what's there to fear in anyone around me? If I can trust in God, then no one can do anything to me. No one can hurt me because I'm trusting in God, ultimately. So, back in, it was the year 155. The man's name was Polycarp. Polycarp was, he had grown up in Smyrna. Now, you remember Smyrna? Where do you hear about Smyrna? Revelation 1. One of the churches that Jesus tells to send a letter to there at the beginning of Revelation was Smyrna. And that letter to Smyrna was one of two, I guess, where Jesus really didn't have anything negative to say. He encourages them, he emboldens them, and he lets them know they've got this, what he called the synagogue of Satan there in their midst, and they were going to be headed toward a really fierce persecution. Now that was probably, toward the end of the first century, in the 80s, 90s, somewhere in there. Polycarp was born, the best we know, in AD 69. So he had lived already, some 30 years or 20 to 30 years there in Smyrna, probably there whenever they received that letter. What we know about Polycarp is that after John was released from his exile on the island of Patmos, where he got that revelation, church history tells us that he moved to Ephesus. And he became an elder for the church in Ephesus, and in his old age, he taught regularly to that church in Ephesus. Ephesus was just a little bit away from Smyrna. And what church history tells us, and some of the writers from that time, is that Polycarp actually became a student of John's. He knew the apostle. And so he learned some valuable lessons. He learned about Jesus more and more, about the stories that John would tell. He also knew a lot about Paul, because again, Paul had been in Ephesus for a long time, for several of his missionary journeys. And when Paul was there, he would send messages out to the surrounding towns, and one of those towns, as his letters would circulate, it would go to Smyrna. And when Polycarp did a lot of his writing, he would quote Paul an awful lot, especially from the book of Philippians. And so Polycarp knew the teachings and writings of Paul directly, and he knew John directly. So as he got older, there in Smyrna, he became a preacher and he became an elder of the church there in Smyrna. Well, in that middle of the second century, there was a terrible persecution that came around. And the thing about the persecution was what they wanted and what they did against Christians was they said, we want you to bow down to the emperor as God. Now the Christians, they were not really for that, as you can imagine. That's not what they wanted to do. But some of them learned that if you just went up and you gave a little bow, and it was kind of like crossing your fingers, I really don't mean it. But if they give a little bow, then they wouldn't bother them. They had gone through the motions of bowing down to the emperor as God. Well, Polycarp refused to do that. Polycarp, at the time that this story comes up, is 86 years old. And they arrest Polycarp. They come to him and say, all you got to do, it's a simple out. All you got to do is bow down to the image of the emperor and we'll be good. This was Polycarp's response to that. He says, for 86 years, I have been his servant, and he has done me no wrong. And how can I now blaspheme my king who saved me? And then church tradition tells us that Polycarp was burned at the stake, and he wasn't dying fast enough, and so they also run him through with a sword, and he died by sword and by fire. How does a person do that? How does a person face that kind of fear and stand without acting in that fear?
Trust.
A lot of trust. He had learned to trust God with everything. And so tonight, what I want us to look at, we've been looking at these 2 words each night to give us these helps on how to overcome fear in our lives. The first one was know God, know who He is, but also just that relationship with Him where you know God. Last week we talked about loving God, giving Him all of our love and understanding His love for us. Tonight we're going to talk about trusting God. What does it mean to place this kind of trust, and what gets in the way of that trust? So the place I want to start is, last week we talked about that fear of being abandoned or being left alone, that fear of being rejected as being that root of most of our fears. There's another source of fear out there that I want us to consider, and that is the fear that comes from idolatry. Now, at the time of Polycarp, he was well aware of idols. That polytheism, that, again, bowing down to the emperor, it was real. Now, the definition of idolatry is, as I read in one place, is giving to any person, purpose, or plan the ultimate allegiance and control that really belongs to God. Now, we don't have idols in the sense of wood and stone and images in our culture too much. But what kind of idols do we got?
Sports.
TV.
All right, let's get a few of them up here.
Sports.
Sports, TV,
Family.
Work. Dollar bill.
what else you want to put up there?
Money.
Money? Got money up there.
Oh, sorry.
Mhm. What did I hear? Fame? Oh, self. What else would you put up there?
Comfortability. Comfortability.
Is that a real word?
Trust you.
I'm just
I
going to put
trust you that
comfort.
it's a real word.
Just because you can't spell it doesn't mean it's not a real word.
Well, it isn't in here if I can't spell it. I already got it wrong on the PowerPoint, all right? So, okay, we've got comfort.
Pets.
Pets. Oh, our little dog would hate to hear that.
I disagree.
Well, we have 3.
Yeah.
I would say depravity, where people just do things that everybody knows is just just horrible. Everybody recognizes it. The kind of stuff that goes on the news, or goes onto the TV at 10 o'clock at night, and just stuff that's just horrible. He's put out there for everybody to just worship.
And oftentimes it's there for the shock value and
Yes.
to gain people's attention. Good, yeah.
Intelligent.
Good job.
Okay, we got work over here. Good. Has anybody named your own?
Medicine,
Medicine.
science, medicine/science.
I'll give science its own category down here.
I wonder how the little pets got in there. That was kind of cool.
The little pets. Now we know whose Peter's is. We've got idols all around us. It is a person, a purpose, a plan that we give allegiance to that really belongs to God alone. How is it that that kind of idolatry could be the cause of fear in somebody's life? I mean, you think what I'm doing is I'm giving this allegiance, I'm giving this trust to one of these things up here in order to keep from being fearful. But how is it that idolatry could actually become a reason for fear?
Losing it.
The fear of losing it.
Failure.
The failure at it.
Yeah.
The failure on my part or the failure of that idol that I put up?
Both.
Both. Because there's two sides of it. One is that I will somehow fail at reaching that goal of what that said. You know, I don't reach power. I don't reach the fame. I don't reach. But then the failure that causes in my own life could lead to fear. How does idolatry lead to fear in our life?
The anxiety of always trying to make sure that you're planning and one step ahead of grasping those things. I don't know if people see Inside Out too, but it's such a beautiful picture of how anxiety works and that you're always going, well, this might happen or this might happen or this might happen, and if I want to make sure that I reach this goal, this idol, I have to plan for everything, every contingency.
Because everything may drop out from under me.
We might be afraid that we're taking more attention to that than to God.
That's true. That's
Should
true. We get afraid that God is going to strike because he finds out that I'm giving my allegiance somewhere else.
The idols ask a lot, but they give nothing because they are nothing.
They demand our life.
When we expect support from them, that's not there.
Right. And then they disappoint so badly.
Yeah, dwelling on things every day that are of no importance that cause anxiety.
Yeah. Because they're so
You don't let
elusive.
it go.
We treat them like they're all powerful, and yet we learn very quickly how weak they can actually be.
And if it's not doing you any good, it's just, it has no importance, it's just causing you trauma.
Yeah. One of the things that causes me fear whenever I find myself giving myself to one of these or any number of other things is sometimes I wonder, what if God decides to tell me, I told you so? I've given myself to one of these, and so he's going to teach me a lesson. Well, when God decides he's going to teach a lesson, if I'm on the wrong side of that lesson, I'm not sure I want to be a part of that. And so idolatry can do that as well. Got a question for you now. This may sound kind of blasphemous at first, but stick with me here. And one of our anybody know the education minister around here? I'm not him anymore, so you can't blame me. There we go. anybody think that maybe at times we can turn God into an idol? No, no way. Apparently, God was concerned about the people of Israel turning him into an idol, because the second command, what was it?
Make images of him.
No, the first one was no other gods, no graven images, no idols, no images of him. How do we make God into an idol?
So is that why people saw his face, they died?
There was something perhaps to that, but in his holiness and his majesty, yeah, it was too powerful, and yeah, and instead of trying to create him in our image, leave him in his, let him determine himself. And that's the point. We can turn God into an idol when we create him in our image, rather than allowing God to be God. When God becomes the vending machine, all I got to do is put in the right prayer and push the right buttons, and God will give me whatever I want. Or he becomes the vengeance mechanism, where I'm praying that God will go get this person, go get that person that hurt me, and he becomes my means of trying to get revenge on other folks around me. Where God becomes my servant instead of me being his servant. Which, by the way, that's really kind of where all this comes back to, isn't it? I've got my purposes, my desires, my goals. In order to get to that point, I pick whatever God I want to use in order to get to that purpose. And that does cause a lot of fear, because I realize that I picked the wrong ones. Am I doing this the right way? What if it lets me down? What if I don't meet up to that expectation I've set for myself? See, one of the things for us to do tonight is to do a little bit of checking to see what are those hidden idols in our lives that we know we're not supposed to have any, and so I don't acknowledge it, but it's that very thing in my life that I'm giving more attention to than I am in my trust to God that's causing that fear in my life. And it's all happening because I won't acknowledge that's what's happening in my life. That makes sense?
Well, what would you call it when the ceremony surrounding the religion becomes more important than the relationship with God? Is that not?
It's a form of idolatry.
Idolatry. That's what I was thinking when you asked the question.
I'm going to use, that would be another one up here, but I'm going to use quotation marks. Religion can become my idol. Where I do the right rituals, I do it the right way, I do the right stuff, I do the check marks the way I'm supposed to. That's what the Pharisees had. They wanted to make sure they got all the forms correct. Their heart didn't have to be in it, but as long as they got the forms correct, then everything was good. God owed them. I put in quotation marks because James actually said there is such a thing as pure religion. Religion itself is not bad. It's taking care of the widows and orphans and keeping oneself from being polluted by the world. So there is a religion that God accepts and prescribes. What we do is we turn it around into a self-prescribed, self-described religion of rituals and practices and things like that. It's good. And then I get fearful. What if I haven't done the right thing? What if I haven't done enough? What if I'm wrong about one of those things I'm supposed to do?
Well, it can be even more simple than that. What happens if I miss communion too many times? What happens if this happens?
What if I miss church?
Get ridiculous with something like that.
You know, I've actually talked to people that, God said, go and share your faith with other folks. I said, I can't do that. Well, why not? Well, what if I say the wrong thing? If I say the wrong thing and I lead them astray, then isn't that worse than not telling them anything at all? And I become fearful about going and sharing that which is supposed to alleviate all of my fears. That's a real problem. What are those fears that are caused by those idols in my life? And one of the questions to decide, do I have one of these idols, is what are you afraid to lose of these that we've listed up here? Now, some of those, family. I'm afraid to lose my job. I'm afraid to do, all those could be things that we are afraid of because they're so near and dear to us. But which one really causes that deep-seated fear that if it were to go away, life would completely fall apart for me? And should family be that way?
No.
See, as important as family is to us, what did Jesus say? If you don't hate your father and mother and your brother and sister and love me, then you cannot be my disciple. It gives us an indication of the place that even family is to have in our lives. Now, sure, it'd be devastating. Sure, it would be grief-stricken. It would be traumatic. I'm not saying that it would not affect us deeply. The question is, what kind of fear would set in if that went away? That paralyzing fear that life could not go on if I lost one of these.
Well, but people give up these things for other idols, so why
Yeah.
wouldn't you give it up? I mean, because some people work so much that they never see their family.
Right.
Because work is their idol. And so if you would give up your family for this idol, why wouldn't you give up your family to be a part of God's?
That's why idolatry can be so deceptive and so seducing. I'm working hard so I can provide for my family. That's why I'm giving myself so hard to my work, so I can fulfill my responsibilities. Well, I'm giving everything I've got to my family. Isn't that what God wants? So what's the answer to that? Let's go over now. In a way, I'm going to be. I'm going to borrow from Sunday's lesson. Now, let's see. Anybody in class with me on Sunday morning? Good, because I can repeat what I said Sunday morning in my class, and none of you heard. We're going to go over to Exodus chapter 3 and 4. We're going to look at Moses. A little bit about Moses leading up to chapter 3 and 4. And again, we talked about this on Sunday morning. You remember the life of Moses. Trivia question. You've been listening well in class. How old was Moses when he went to Egypt to lead the people out of slavery?
80 something.
80 years old. Any 80-year-olds in here? There's a couple. All right. You're just getting started, see? The rest of us, we're still in the preparation stage here. I want you to notice some things that the Bible says about Moses. I want you to hold your spot there in Exodus and go over to Acts chapter 7. Okay, I'm going to get my trusty, dusty bookmark. Now I go over to Acts chapter 7. Stephen is preaching this sermon, and he's talking about the history of God's people, how God had been working through his people, how God had been working to deliver his people. And in verse 20 of chapter 7, he says, "At that time, Moses was born, and he was no ordinary child. For 3 months he was cared for by his family. When he was placed outside, Pharaoh's daughter took him and brought him up as her own son. Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and action." You can imagine what kind of childhood and young adulthood Moses had. What kind of education would he have received?
Yes.
Most excellent.
Not just the best in the city, not just the best in the land. His would have been the best in the world.
I wonder why he said to God then that he couldn't speak.
Well, that is a really good question. But in that first 40 years that we see of Moses' life, he had the best of everything. He didn't have anything to worry about. Everything in his life was that upward trajectory. He was a prince of Egypt. He could have anything he wanted. And he did get anything he wanted, including the best education, because it included education in languages. It included education in philosophy, because Egypt was the center of all the philosophical teachings at the time. It would have been education in mathematics and education in all the different kinds of disciplines. Moses had it at his disposal. He had everything. Notice what Stephen says next. Verse 23. When Moses was 40 years old, he decided to visit his own people, the Israelites. He saw one of them being mistreated by an Egyptian. So he went to his defense and avenged him by killing the Egyptian. Moses thought that his own people would realize that God was using him to rescue them, but they did not. The next day, Moses came upon two Israelites who were fighting. He tried to reconcile them by saying, "Men, you are brothers. Why do you want to hurt each other?" But the man who was mistreating the other pushed Moses aside and said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian yesterday?" And when Moses heard this, he fled to Midian, where he settled as a foreigner and had 2 sons. What do we find out about Moses from Stephen's sermon? He's a murderer. Then we read that in Exodus.
He ran away.
Hmm?
He ran away.
He ran away. Why?
Because he feared.
Afraid this man knew that he killed an Egyptian.
It had been found out. But notice what he thought about himself. He'd grown up around the Egyptian gods. He knew about all those different gods that are out there. But one of the things that he learned about the true God from his family and from his people. Somewhere along the line, he had learned that God had made this prophecy about the people of Israel, that they were going to go to Egypt. They were going to be there for 400 years, part of that time in terrible slavery and bondage, and then God would deliver them from that bondage. What did Moses think? I'm the guy. Did you see it? He thought they would understand he was the guy to lead them out. And when it didn't happen, he flees Egypt in fear. Does that give a little bit of a better understanding of why Moses responds to God like he does in Exodus chapter 3?
Yes.
I mean, here we go back to Exodus chapter 3. The beginning of the story here. Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I'll go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. And when the Lord saw that he'd gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, "Moses, Moses." And Moses said, "Here I am." "Do not come any closer," God said. "Take off your sandals, for the place where you're standing is holy ground." Then he said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And at this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Then God said, "I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I'm concerned about their suffering. So I've come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them." Then the kicker in verse 10. "So now, go. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." You're Moses. You've had the experience that you've had. What's going through your mind? No way.
Seriously?
The people will not follow me.
The people are going to follow me. They didn't do it before. Why would you say no?
You'd be afraid the same thing would happen.
Happen all over again. I've been there, done that, tried it. I failed. They tried to. I had to flee before because they find out about me. What if I go back and the charges are still there? That I don't know about this. What's it called? Whenever a crime you're charged with has a statute of limitations. I don't know about Egypt's statute of limitations. They may go ahead and. Moses is afraid. And what we see in what Moses does is notice Moses' excuses for why he cannot go. First thing he says, verse 11. Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" He questions his strength. He questions his identity. He questions his ability. He says, I can't do it, God. He questions his notoriety. Been there, done that. Who am I to go and do that? Question number 2, verse 13. Moses said to God, "Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them?" Question number 2 is, who are you? Now, why would that have been such an important question? What am I telling them? If they ask who you are, what's your name, what am I going to tell them?
They have their own gods.
And a bunch of them. And each God has its own name. And this God is a God of the thunder, and this God is God of the sun, and this one's the God of death, and that one's the God of the Nile, and this one's the God. I mean, they've got a God for everything. And so he says, I'm going to go back and I'm going to say, God has sent me to rescue you. And they're going to say, which God is it? What am I supposed to tell them? What is your identity, God? I don't know my own. What is yours? Question number 3, chapter 4. Moses answered, "What if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord has not appeared to you?" Question number 3 is, how can I prove it? How am I supposed to go and prove that I came from you instead it's my own idea again? How am I supposed to do this? Question number 4, verse 10. Moses said to the Lord, "Pardon your servant, Lord. I've never been eloquent, neither in the past, nor since you have spoken to your servant. I'm slow of speech and tongue." He has lost all confidence. Before, he knew what to say. He knew he was going to be the leader that was going to lead those folks out of Egypt. Now he says, I can't do it because I don't know how to talk. What will I say?
What he did before was not in God's timing.
That's right. But that's what caused so much fear. Because again, like somebody said earlier, I try to do it outside of God's timing for me.
Not timing. He tried to take God's place. He was going to lead the people. Now he's saying, I can't do this because I'm not you.
I don't have what it takes.
So.
And then I love his last one, chapter 4 and verse 13. But Moses said, "Pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else." My translation, I just don't want to. Who am I? Who are you? How can I prove it? What will I say? I don't want to. How many of those questions become the basis for some of the fears we deal with? I don't have what I'm not the person that can do this. I can't handle it. Look at who I am. Look at my weaknesses. Look at what I failed at in the past. Look at what I've tried and it didn't work. Look at all the things that are working against me. God, I'd like to trust you, but I'm not exactly sure that I know you well enough. I mean, will you really support me in this? How can I prove it to somebody? I don't have the tools to do it. Or, that's a big one, isn't it? What will I say? I'll stutter, I'll stammer, I'll do a lot of and I'll look stupid.
Everybody needs an Aaron.
That's right. And then finally I just say, I don't want to. This is where God's answers are so important. Because God talks to Moses after each one of these. And the first one, Moses says, who am I to go and do this? And notice God's answer in verse 12. God said, I will be with you. And this will be the sign to you that it is I who has sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Moses says, who am I? God says, I'll be there. Question number 2. When Moses says, who do I tell him sent me? Verse 14, God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you're saying to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation. You got all those other gods back there, this one of that, this one of that, this one of that. I'm not the God of this, that, or that. I just am. I'm him. I'm he. That's the correct grammar, isn't it? I am he. That's it. In fact, many people, whenever they look at that, either mean that what he means by that is I exist, or I'm present.
I am, and there's nothing else.
That's it. The answer to question number 3, how can I prove it? I love his answer. Just use what you have. Remember what he said? He says, how am I supposed to show him? And what tools have I got? Moses says, what you got in your hand?
Staff.
It's a staff. Just an ordinary stick of wood. Use that. See, the interesting thing is, something that we think is really ordinary in our life, God will take that and turn it extraordinary. We'll just let him. His answer to what will I say? I know what I'm doing. See, I love God's answer to that whenever he says, in verse 10, he says, pardon your servant, I've never been eloquent, either in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I'm slow of speech and tongue. And the Lord said to him, who gave human beings their mouths? Who made them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I know what I'm doing. I made you. And when Moses said, I don't want to, first of all, God got a little angry by then. Finally God will lose his patience. Stop arguing with me. And he says, I'll provide companions for you. Now, do you notice the difference between what Moses focuses on and what God focuses on? What is Moses' focus? Himself. And that's where fear comes from anyway. Whenever I turn inward, whenever I look at myself, I look at who I think I am or who I don't think I am. Whenever I look at my weaknesses, my failings, whenever I look at my aloneness, like we talked about last week, whenever I look at what I've got at my disposal, when I look at what I know and what I don't know, all those things, it's about me. And I understand how short I am in the things I want to do, and so it causes me great fear because I don't think I can make it. I don't think I can meet the challenge that's in front of me. What is God's focus in his answers? Every time, it's on him. It's on God's presence. It's on God's strength. It's on God's wisdom. I don't, who am I? I'm going to be with you. Don't worry about who you are. I'm the one that's important. Well, who are you? I am. You don't have to worry about that. I just am. Well, how can I prove it? Just use what you got. I'll turn it into something extraordinary. Well, what am I going to say? Oh, come on now. Don't you think I know what I'm doing? I don't want to. Listen, you don't have to do this by yourself. I'm going to give you other folks. Look around you. I'm going to give you other folks to help you. I'm going to give you other folks to encourage you. I'm going to give you other folks to support you. But notice ultimately what God says is He's giving that whenever He says Aaron's going to come his way. Start in verse 14. He says, the Lord's anger burned against Moses. He said, what about your brother Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well. He's already on his way to meet you, and he'll be glad to see you. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. I will help both of you speak and will teach you what to do. It comes back to His presence, His ability to do what He wants to do through Moses. I don't know. As I was putting this together, I said, yeah, we're going to talk about fear. How do you break those chains of fear in our life? And I said, isn't this just a little bit too simple? Isn't this message just a little bit too simplistic? But maybe that's the point. We try to come up with all the different ways to break fear, and we use all sorts of gimmicks and psychological answers, and not that all the psychology, there's psychology out there that will help us understand some of those things, but ultimately the bottom line for Moses and the bottom line for us is to trust the God who knows what He's doing and is present in our lives. It was Jesus who said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you.
Well, you know, Moses had already killed the Egyptian, so I guess he had fear to have to go back.
That's right. And we've all got a past we can be fearful of, don't we? There's things I've done. I don't want to go back to that. I don't want anybody to find out about that. I don't want anybody to bring that up again. God says, I'm going to be with you. I know what I'm doing. So, trust God. And here's the thoughts for tonight. Number one, check your heart. Check your heart. Is there one of those gods up there that's got a hold of you? Luke chapter 8. Luke chapter 8 is one of the places where the gospel writers record the parable of the sower, or the parable of the seeds. And as he's giving this parable, verse 5 of Luke chapter 8, he says, a farmer went out to sow his seed. He was scattering the seed. Some fell along the path. It was trampled on. The birds ate it up. Some fell on rocky ground. When it came up, the plants withered because they had no moisture. But notice verse 7. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up with it and choked the plant. Still others fell on good soil. It came up and yielded a crop 100 times more than was sown. And in verse 14, it's in that section where he's describing and is explaining to his disciples what each of those mean. And in verse 14, he talks about that third seed, and he said, the seed that fell among thorns stands for those who hear. But as they go on their way, they are choked by life's worries, riches, and pleasures, and they don't mature. Hear what he said? You come to God's word, but rather than trusting God at His word, taking God at His word, my attention gets distracted because of all those fears that I've got in my life. He can't take care of them, and because of those idols that I pay attention to instead.
Is that what check your heart is?
Check your heart.
I wondered about that. What does that mean, check your heart?
What is sitting on the throne of your heart where God should be alone?
Worries.
Because I squeeze Him out with those worries and those fears. Those are the things I put in my heart.
Okay.
Instead of allowing God to be God alone. Same thing here. Check the God of your heart. Check your heart to see if you are giving if your heart is that fertile soil for God's word to take root in, and then check the God of your heart. Is He truly the one that is taking control of your life? That's where your allegiance is. Because only then can you learn to trust Him. Number 3, depend on the one who is always present. Would you go to Hebrews chapter 13? Remember in Hebrews, the Hebrew writer he's talked about, in chapter 11, he's talked about those great men and women of faith. And embedded in a lot of those descriptions is how they had to overcome their own fear in order to follow God and follow Him faithfully. And how they did not allow fear to get in the way of them following God. And when you get to chapter 13, he says, starting in verse 4, marriage should be honored by all, and marriage be kept pure, for God will judge the adulterer and all the sexually immoral. He says, keep your lives free from the love of money, and be content with what you have. You hear the language of idolatry here? Whether it's be those relationships that are in our lives, the things that threaten those relationships, whether it be greed and the desire to have more. But then he gets back to this idea of presence. He says, keep your lives free from the love of money. Be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you. Never will I forsake you. So we say with confidence, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? We come right back to where we started. Ultimately, the way that I get past the fear in my life is to understand that I've got someone greater in my life who can take me through that fear. Am I willing to trust Him? And then number 4, when in doubt, trust anyway. This one's the hard one. Has anybody in here ever wanted a sign from God to help you get over something? Make a decision, get past a fear, something like that? I remember whenever the elders here at Greenlawn first contacted us and they were talking to me about coming here, we actually told the elders 5 times, no, we're not doing that. And the more that they badgered us, the more they talked to us, the more we were praying about it. And I just finally said, God, just show me a sign. What do you want me to do? Just write it up in the clouds. Anybody done that one? Write it up in the clouds. Form the clouds around just to give me the sign. Show me what you want me to do. I don't know, what signs do you look for? I know of one person that says, the sign that you're doing God's will is that your heart is finally at peace about it. I'm not sure Moses was really at peace whenever God said go and he said okay. That one can be a little deceptive too, because even Scripture says the heart is deceptive. What's the sign? Go back to Exodus chapter 3. God says, I want you to go. And he says, who am I to go? And God said, I'm going to be with you. And this is the sign. Remember, he gave him a sign. Remember what the sign was?
They're going to worship at the mountain afterwards.
They're going to join back up at Sinai and they're going to worship God. Some sign. He's actually got to go to Egypt, obey God, bring the people out, face all that fear, then get to the mountain, and then he'll know that God did what he said he would do. Did you realize that sometimes the sign only comes after we trust and obey? We want a sign before we trust because God, show me that I can really trust you. And God says, it doesn't work that way. I'm God, you're not. Romans 12, verse 2, don't be conformed any longer by the pattern of this world. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then he says, then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. When will we know whenever God's will is perfect? After we trust and obey. after we allow Him to transform our lives.
Sometimes the sign isn't enough. Gideon said, give me a sign. God gave him a sign, and Gideon said, give me another sign.
And you know, sometimes God will be gracious and He will give a sign ahead of time. I remember when we were trying to make our decision to come to Lubbock, we had 5 big obstacles to keep from coming. Angela was pregnant, and we knew it was going to be a sensitive pregnancy. We had a house that we were remodeling, and we still owed some, we owed everything on it. We hadn't bought it, only had it for like a few months. And there were 5 great big things. You know what happened? God knocked each one of those down in 1 week. And at the end of the week, we looked at each other and says, well, does God have to hit us over the head with a boulder before we'll finally understand He wants us to go? So He was gracious enough to give us what I believe were some signs that that's what He wanted us to do. But that's not the way He's always treated us. That's not what He's always done for us. Most of the time, it took me trusting and obeying before I realized, look at there. God knew what He was saying all along. Look at that. I could trust Him after all. That's how to get past the fear. So are you willing to trust and obey? Are you willing for God to be God and not you? Are you willing for God to be God and not some of this other stuff that we try to put our trust in? Because that is how to get past the fear, is to be obedient through it. Okay, next week, look up 2 Corinthians 12, 9 and 10. Familiar passage, but go deeper. How can weakness, and perhaps even fear, become an ally? How can you embrace it instead of always run away from it? Thank y'all so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.